Thank you for tuning in to page 121. Today we're going to take a look at atmospheres and how you deal with them in Traveller. They can be an incredibly important part of the game, and yet it's something that's kind of overlooked a lot of times as you're setting up the game. You're going ahead and you're getting a look at the planet, or you're either creating it or you're looking at a pre-printed one, and you're seeing that the atmosphere has a slight taint, and that is going to require you to wear a breather mask when you go outside. So you go ahead and you jot that in your notes, and you mention it at the table as you're going along, and nobody thinks too much about it. And people step outside and you say, "Are you wearing your breather mask?" And they say yes, and it's all well and good, and everything's fine. That's as far as it can go, but it's much more interesting if they get into a situation where, for whatever reason, they don't have access to the breathing gear, and now they have to dealing with the fact that they don't have the breathing gear, and they have to find a way to get from point A to point B. And that's how you breathe a little atmosphere into your game. Get it? The idea is that the atmosphere can be another obstacle for the players to overcome. You don't want the atmosphere of a planet or whatever planetary body you may be gaming on. You don't want that to just be kind of an, oh, who cares? If you're on a garden world, it's got a perfect oxygen-nitrogen mix, very Earth-like, then okay, that's not a big part of your story. You don't want it to be a big part of your story. You're going to go forward. But if you're on a planet that has a very nice garden world planet atmosphere, but there's a pollen in the air that it turns out the humans are incredibly allergic to, but makes Vargir incredibly hungry. That can be a good part of your game. The humans start sneezing their brains off. The Vargir start eyeing the humans as something to chow down on. It's just different ways that you can bring atmosphere to your game. We get a lot of looks at atmosphere. First off, in this 1983 edition of the Journal of Traveller's Aid Society, number 17. I was really excited when I saw this because there was not a bunch on atmospheres. There was some dry text on atmospheres prior to this, but this one gave us our first good look at what you can really do with atmospheres, and I know that it was influential with me. I started playing Traveller in about 81, and I ran a little bit here and there, but I didn't take over as the game master of the campaign until sometime around late 82, 83, somewhere in there. And I honestly don't remember. The guy who had been running our game got serious with a girl and basically gave up playing, and I acquired a lot of his Traveller stuff, and I took over the campaign. And I think that was sometime in late 82, early 83. I don't remember. But the important thing is, when this issue came out, I grabbed it up because I had a chance to read up on atmospheres, and it was something that I had really not had a lot of exposure to. So as I said, if you want to do a garden world where the atmosphere is fine, then you don't worry about it. It's just part of the background, and your story goes in another direction. But if you want to make it a difficult atmosphere to exist in, the first Alien movie is a really good example. You're on a planet, but the planet has an atmosphere that is not breathable. So you've got to wear a space suit and full cover and everything. And as they do, they go to the ship and they find the ship with the xenomorph eggs and all that good stuff. That is a really important moment because you also have one of the xenomorphs gets through the face shield on one of the people and attaches itself, plants the egg and everything, and that, of course, drives the story. But he doesn't perish from his skin being exposed to the atmosphere. We're assuming the face hugger rather, is keeping him alive, and the atmosphere itself is not harmful to his skin in an immediate kind of way. That's a really great example, in my opinion, of making atmosphere a limiting factor. A key moment in that is that with this thing attached to his face, Ripley wants to leave him basically, at least in the airlock, if not off the ship, because he's contaminated. She's concerned about contaminating the ship. By the way, she turns out she's right. But for reasons in the story, he's allowed into the ship. That could be a really important moment for your players as you're playing the game. Now, I'm showing this old version of Atmospheres, and we're going to go to the new one. This is the excellent World Builder's Handbook, which Mongoose put out a few months ago. I took a look at the entire book in a video a few months ago. This was written by the always outstanding Kira Langiskan. I'm sorry if I get your name wrong. I really do apologize. If someone could shoot me a phonetic pronunciation of that, I'd be happy to pronounce it correctly. But my point is, around page 80 of this PDF, we get a nice look at atmospheres. And it tells, there you go, and it tells us what we need to know about how to write up your atmosphere and what it can do to you. So if I'm running a game, an example is from one of my old campaigns. I had run a game where, for reasons, the players were aboard a ground station on a planet with an exotic atmosphere, actually a very dangerous atmosphere, low oxygen and somewhat acidic. Going outside, your expected survival was something like a minute and a half. So I drummed that into the players, and they were aboard the station for a while. And like I say, it was a groundside station. Well, for reasons of the story, the conflict breaks out, and the players find themselves with a need to leave the station, but no suits. The suits are in the area where the bad guys right now have held. The exact reason in the story was they were basically hijacking the station. So one of the first things the bad guys did was secure all the spacesuits and the airlocks so that the players couldn't get out and get to their ship and all that stuff. I forget the exact conflict that I was doing, but the important thing was the players had to get off the station and put on their suits and cross to their waiting starship to get out of the situation. And I did that on purpose. I made the starship separate from the station because I always intended to go ahead and kind of strand them in the station and see how they deal with it. That ended up being a really good, long night as the players not only fought their way out, but more importantly, thought their way out. They had to figure out how they were going to deal with the situation of being blocked off, being away from any kind of all of their gear, but is there other gear we can get on the station? Is there stuff we can steal off the bad guys where we can get our hands on some suits and get over to our ship? Because the way I had the situation set up, if they had gotten to the ship, they either had the option to get away or they could have even taken the bad guy's ship. The bad guy's ship was really nothing. It was really just a small, like I think it was 100 or a 200-ton merchant. And they had just come there in that. And there were 8 or 10 bad guys. I forget the exact deal. But the point was the atmosphere literally blocked them from leaving the station and getting to their ship. And the reward was if they got to their ship, they could either get away or destroy the other guy's landed craft, and then they would hold all the cards. And that was the conflict that I put them in. That ended up being some fun role-playing because it left them with a lot of decisions to make about how they were going to deal with this. Ultimately, what they did is they thought their way through, and they baited a couple of the guys into an isolated area. They were able to take them out and then acquire some of their gear, and they started crossing basically in teams. As they acquired gear, they got to their ship, they got better firepower. That was the kind of thing I ran. It was a very long, complicated game, but this was probably the mid-'80s that I ran it, and I ran it in about a 6-hour window. A ton of fun. All that set up by the fact that it was a hostile environment, a hostile atmosphere. They couldn't just go outside and get their stuff. So that's my whole point of this video is you want to add atmosphere as another opponent for your players. You want it to be something interesting. You want the exotic, deadly atmosphere to breathe life into your game because that gives you the best opportunity as a game master to really challenge your players, keep them on their toes, but not make it a situation where you're going to end up with a total party kill. You don't want that. So when I was reading through the World Builder's Handbook and prepping for this video, I came across the atmosphere thing and I thought, oh yeah, the atmosphere as an opponent is a great storyline. And now the atmosphere, of course, is not the primary opponent, but it can be a secondary opponent. Going back to what I said earlier about a pollen or some type in the air, it could even be a pollutant. Maybe it's an industrialized world, heavily industrialized. Maybe it's a volcanic world. We had some very bad air here in the Chicagoland area last year. The Canadian wildfires, smoke came down here. And I spent better part of about 3 weeks seated in a chair, able to do little more than struggle to breathe. And the atmosphere was so bad that one of our cats actually got a skin rash that made him claw himself up and everything because his skin dried out, and we had to take him for steroids and everything. And it ended up being a pretty big deal in our household because I was very laid up with the inability to breathe, and then we had a family pet who was affected by the atmosphere as well. So that is a good example of a tainted atmosphere. I was breathing the normal air, except the air had wildfire smoke in it, and couldn't breathe. Anybody that knows the backstory on this channel is my lungs were damaged due to COVID back in March of 2020. And because of that and lifelong asthma, I have a hard time breathing. I have to kind of ration my breathing a little bit. And that atmosphere, even with the house closed and the air conditioning running, was not something I was able to do much in. So that's a personal life example of an exotic taint to an atmosphere, in this case, wildfire smoke. So it's just a good way to keep your players on their toes, whether they're in an industrialized world where they're going to be interacting with the natives who are used to it. Maybe the natives don't need to wear breathers anymore. Maybe the natives are somehow genetically modified so they don't need the breathers, or maybe they're just used to it. Who knows? Whatever your story wants to be, it can be. Maybe the natives thrive in the atmosphere and would be in trouble without whatever the particular taint is that's otherwise harmful to your players. There are a lot of different ways you can do this kind of thing. You can have the players be on the planet. It's an unexplored planet. Everything seems fine, but they find out once they get back to the ship that there's an exotic mold spore in the atmosphere, and it begins to populate in their lungs. And you now have some conflict as to where they're going to get medical help and things like that. Just a lot of different ways the atmosphere of the game can dictate the atmosphere of your game. So that's really the point of what I wanted to say today. I recommend the World Builder's Handbook tremendously. This is an incredibly helpful guide. Like I said, back in the early 80s, we had some World Builder stuff, and especially in the late 80s. But this Atmospheres article in the Journal of Travelers Aid Society, number 17, was the very first one that I remember reading. And I thought, wow, this can really be a big impact for my game. I'm going to have to use it. And let's face it, a lot of role-playing games don't offer you the atmosphere or the changing of the atmosphere. If you're playing a traditional D&D type game or some superhero game, usually the atmosphere itself isn't much of an issue. That's why one of the reasons I like space games and one of the reasons I particularly like Traveller. But that's all I've got to say about exotic atmospheres, it being a part of your environment in your game. And I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for watching. Everybody breathe easy, and I'll see you next time on page 121.